Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear guests and dear viewers of our joint session on Russia and Japan and their foreign policies in the new world order. We today have an excellent panel of 5 professors who will be talking on various issues I will present a little shortly. But we are also joined today by our colleagues without whose cooperation we could not have organized this event, and our partners at the Consulate General of Japan. And we're also joined by the Provost of the European University at St. Petersburg, Natalia MAZUR. I would go ahead and give the floor to Dr. MAZUR and Consul General of Japan at St. Petersburg. And then afterwards, I will briefly introduce more technical housekeeping details on where we'll start our event, if you don't mind.
Dearest colleagues, I'm very happy and deeply honored opening this, actually, let's be honest, a small seminar. But a small seminar in nowadays costs sometimes more than a big conference, because it's a real time of troubles, especially for international relationship that we're going through now. Borders are closed, connections are interrupted, and our spirits are very much down. Smaller deeds help us to build bridges, help us to cross borders, and help us to prepare a much better future. So with great belief in our future cooperation, I welcome you in Zoom, and I cherish my hopes to welcome you soon in the European University alive. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for brilliant speeches that are going to follow. And now I will give the word with many thanks to the General Consul of Japan in St. Petersburg. Thank you very much.
Dear Provost MAZUR, dear Professor LOMAGIN, dear professors representing Japan and Russia, dear those who are watching this seminar, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for being here today at the online seminar, Foreign Policies of Russia and Japan under the new international circumstances, organized by European University at St. Petersburg. This seminar aims to provide an opportunity for the distinguished professors to have a discussion on the prospects for the foreign policies of both countries under the new international environment, such as the advent of a new administration in US. Bilateral relations between Japan and Russia have the greatest underlying potential. In recent years, Russia has been proactively enhancing relations with the countries in the Asia-Pacific region that are growth center of the global economy. The development of relations with Russia as an important partner in the Asia-Pacific region, the building of stable relations, and the deepening of cooperation contribute not only to Japan's interests, but are also extremely important for regional stability and development. The United States is the only ally of Japan, while China is the country with which Japan has the longest history of diplomacy, and it is the biggest economic partner of our country. Through the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific, which is not targeted for any specific country and envisions the Indian and the Pacific Ocean as an overarching region, Japan aims to promote peace, stability, and prosperity in this region through ensuring the principles such as the rule of law, freedom of navigation, peaceful settlement of disputes, and promotion of free trade. India also plays an important role in this concept. I am certain that this seminar will provide perspectives and the direction of cooperation of each of the new bilateral relations by overlooking the external relations Japan and Russia spaces with such actors as US, China, Europe, and India. Human exchange and mutual understanding play a key role in developing relations. This year marks a Japan-Russia Year of Regional Exchanges, and our consulate plans a wide range of events. This time, I'm pleased that the academic exchange is realized by prestigious professors not from Moscow, but from St. Petersburg, the northern capital of Russia, and from Japan. Before concluding my speech, I'd like once again to express my sincere gratefulness to professors from European University and from Japan, and to those who are watching this seminar. Thank you very much.
Right. I would like to thank once again Provost Natalia, MAZUR, and Consul General Yasumasa IIJIMA in St. Petersburg. Thank you very much for your opening remarks and for your welcoming speeches. I will now take only 1 or 2 minutes, perhaps, to introduce our plan for today's seminar, and we will go ahead with that. First of all, I'd like to let everyone know that we have not more than 2 hours, and it is 10:07 a.m. here in St. Petersburg. I know it's much later in Japan and in Australia, where we have people joining us from. The audience is quite broad. We have cooperated, both the European University in St. Petersburg and our Japanese colleagues in universities of Rikyo and Tokyo, as well as the Consulate General of Japan, have done a great job in promoting this event. So I expect to have people, students to foreign policy experts and perhaps diplomats joining this session and watching it. So I guess the audience is going to be broad, and the number of questions and issues that we are going to touch upon may be quite wide. So I have the hard task of following the timeline and trying not to interrupt anyone, but to make sure that everything is going as planned. We will spend the first 1 hour for 6 presentations by 5 professors, 3 from Russia and 2 from Japan. And then the second hour will be left for the panel discussion, which again, we anticipate to divide into 2 parts, right? For the first part, I do have already a few questions that I would like every speaker, as much as they would like to touch upon for 1 or 2 minutes. And then we will have the remaining quarter of this entire event, about 20 to 30 minutes, open to other questions, which we have already received. They were emailed to us previously, but in case we do have time and there are questions that our viewers can post in their comment section in the live YouTube broadcast, and I receive them on time, then I would perhaps choose 1 or 2 to be asked to the professors. Now, very shortly, I apologize in advance, both for in front of our speakers and for the viewers, that I'm not going to have very detailed introductions of every one of our esteemed speakers, for the sake of saving your time and also being sure that everyone who has prepared for this event has read a little bit more about the description of the talks and the presenters. But still, very briefly, as I said, we have 5 presenters, but they will present 6 topics. On the Russian side, we have Professors Nikita, LOMAGIN, and Professor Ivan KURILLA from the European University, as well as Professor Tatiana Romanova from St. Petersburg State University and the European University in St. Petersburg. We're very proud to have her with our Energy Politics in Eurasia program. Thank you. And our Japanese colleagues are Professor Akio Takahara from the University of Tokyo, konnichiwa, and Professor Shiharu Takenaka from Rikyo University in Japan. I apologize if I pronounced anything wrong, but forgive my Japanese. Okay, I think the first part of the presentations will be coming from the side of the Russian professors. Not to make interruptions in between the talks for too long, I will just briefly introduce by one line, perhaps the topic of each presentation, if nobody minds. So the first, as announced, I think, was Professor Ivan KURILLA, with prospects of Russia-US relations under the new circumstances, by which primarily we mean, I think, the election of Joe Biden as the new president of the US and the upcoming parliamentary elections in the Russian Federation. So the floor is yours, Professor KURILLA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gevorg, and thanks everybody for joining. And let me oops. Yeah, I wanted to switch on the presentation, but it doesn't work. Sorry about that. It's here. Okay, so I'll speak without this presentation, and that's I will try to speak more or less schematically, because we do have limited time, and I will first highlight the problems we by now have in the Russian-American relations, and this is I will distinguish between three sets of problems. One is international security, and that included the arms control problems, because you know that by the end of the previous administration in the United States, many important treaties like New START Treaty, INF Treaty, where the United States either withdraw from or announce its aim not to prolong, as in the case of New START. Some of the other important treaties were abandoned by the United States earlier, like ABM Treaty. So we have by the early 2020s, we have a situation when the international system of arms control ceasing to exist. Everything that were built up during detente in the 70s and then during perestroika in early 90s going to collapse, and that's actually increases the fear and increases the international instability. So that was the first set of problems, which I think should be the priority in the Russian-American relations in the new age. Two other sets of problems are of a more, I would say, a philosophical or ideological nature, but they are still important because they are actually define the many problems that do exist and many ways how to solve them. One of them is a different views on the nature of international order. Do we live still in the post-Second World War order of international relations? Do we still live in some remnants of Yalta agreements? That is one position. Or do we live in some different post-Cold War order, which actually already abandoned the Yalta agreements? And if you choose one of the or another of the answer to this question, you will get easy to supporting United Nations, which is one of the Yalta, one of the establishment of the Yalta system. But also you would probably think about the future of former superpowers responsibilities in the world. Or do we have some post-Cold War order which actually was never defined by any international agreement? And this actually idea that we already lived after, we are existing in some different international circumstances is, on the one hand, it's natural. Yes, of course, the world has changed a lot since 1991. But on the other hand, we do not have any big international agreement how to behave in this new world. And this is a big challenge for everybody and for the countries like the United States and Russia, the countries with the hugest amount of nuclear power accumulated. And this is a big challenge for other countries, for China, for emerging countries, and for the old responsible countries as Japan. And also, who set these new norms? does the United States as the only superpower set the norms for the rest, or Russia or China or United Nations set the new norms? And we do not see the clear path to the new world order without deciding how to set the new norms. And this is one of the biggest challenges in the Russian-American relations of the new administration. And the third group of questions, or third group of problems in the Russian-American relations is that long legacy of the domestic use of the image of the other for solving domestic issues. You know, that was for a long time in the United States, even before the Cold War, but especially during Cold War, the Soviet Union or Russia was invented as a significant other from the capital O, the country which was used for, for solving domestic problems, to, exporting domestic problems abroad. Home political problems can be portrayed as a result of the foreign meddling. And when many people believe that after 1991, all of that became history, we saw during the previous administration, during Trump administration, how the Russian menace or Russian meddling was again used in the American domestic politics. This actually has its, mirror image in Russian policies. Russia also used to use the United States as a significant other, and Russian authorities or Russian politicians often use the United States meddling in the Russian affairs as a pretext to smash the opposition, to alienate the groups of the politicians who are in opposition to the current regime. So that is actually, in both countries, the existence of the big menacing other is a very convenient way to solve some domestic problems. It does not mean that Russia and the United States do not try to meddle or do not try to influence the other country, but the scope of this meddling and the timing of making the scandal or keeping it quiet usually coincide with the domestic problems of the increase of the domestic domestic vulnerability of one or another political power in both countries. So, and this is probably the most, or one of the most difficult problems to solve, because this is something of a political culture of two countries, which is accumulated during generations, and it's not an easy thing for any politician to change it, to alter it. It's me, but well. And what are the prospects of those three groups and how they can be solved? I think that we all witnessed that Biden administration already demonstrated its readiness to return to arms control, and that's already the new start has been prolonged for another set of years, and that was a first step. And I think that the arms control negotiations will be resumed and will be continued. And that is a big step forward from what Trump administration had to offer in the Russian-American relations. Two other groups of problems would be not as easy to solve. Well, the nature of international order, I can profess will be discussed between the American and Russian diplomats during all the Biden presidency and probably beyond of it. And this is one of the big problems which could not be decided in the Russian-American relations. We need to involve all the countries, or at least all the major players in the international arena. And of course, there is, first country which came to mind is China, but China cannot be alone from the East Asia. So that is a big and complicated problem. But I think that the diplomats should think that direction, because there should be some basement for the international order. If we abandon Yalta, if we think that Yalta is outlived its time, we need to get something new. Some of the Western critics criticize Russia for offering new Yalta, thinking it's only in the terms of the sphere of influence. But well, probably not the sphere of influence, but some new agreements, some new ideas how to operate in the new environment with a very different world, the world with a cyber, a new, actually is a whole new set of challenges posted by cybersecurity, and with all of the new set of challenges set by climate. So all of that should be considered and put in the basement of the new international set of agreements, probably, or new, maybe new organizations, I do not know, but this is something which will be on the agenda of the, again, of the Russian-American relations and beyond of those bilateral relations, probably to make it multi-polar. So, and the use of the other, as I already mentioned, could not be stopped by a political decision. But however, there will be attempts, I believe, in both sides, in both countries, in the United States and in Russia, to divorce domestic use of the other and international security tools. And this is something which sometimes interfere. And we saw it during Trump era. This heavy domestic use of the Russian menace actually precluded the Trump administration from doing anything meaningful in the Russian-American relations, and that is actually pity circumstances. I do believe that those problems will be, will be set aside or will be divorced, in the during the new administration in the United States. So looking forward, I do think that Russia will keep its role and as a military and political pole, or one of the smaller poles opposite to the United States. But Russia has already lost its role as an economic pole, and you know that China is already another economic pole, and this means for the United States it should act on two different directions. The American-Chinese relations would be, it already started during Trump with the trade wars, and US-Russian relations, because Russia is still very important in the terms of arms and terms of international security concerns. So this is a balance, international balance for the future, 4 or more than 4 years. In a more distant future, I would think about the United States losing its role as a sole economic pole in the Western world. It could be challenged by, if you speak only about the West, it could be challenged by Germany-led Europe, for instance. And we already see the rise of the American-German controversies, American-German tensions. And this actually coincided with the rise of Europe and rise of Germany as a new economic great power. And again, in the more distant future, will not be surprised to see the American-European tensions go deeper. In the future, the future will be defined also by the Russian economic and political relations with the incoming new German leadership in Europe, and by evolution of Russian military and political relations with China. And also the future, if we speak about the distant future, it's also always possible that new other contenders for the role of great power of new relations will emerge. We see how quickly the new powers rise and fall. We see the rise of countries like Brazil, and we see the increasing the influence of different countries. We see how this balance of economic and political power always changing. So we cannot speak about the future thinking only about Russia and the United States and China. We always need to think about other countries in the next decades. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor KURILLA, for your first presentation on the Russian-US relations under the new circumstances and their prospects, and also for the idea of the need to rethink or to think of a new kind of Yalta, or an upgrade of Yalta. I'd like to ask, before we move forward to the next presenter, I'd like to ask to follow the time, and I will be writing to you in the Zoom chat, perhaps 5 minutes or 1 minute beforehand. Let's spend not more than 10 or maybe 12 minutes for the presentations, And I just want to, as a kind reminder, to tell you that the second hour will be actually for the, I hope, for the more live discussion parts. So I very much hope that there will be more involvement between the professors, posing questions perhaps to each other, or adding more of their comments as the discussion develops. So this first part should be more on setting the basic principles of what we would like to talk about in a way, if you want. So our second talk is by Professor Nikita LOMAGIN. He'll be talking about the prospects for Russian Chinese relations and Russian foreign policy towards the CIS countries, the former countries of the former Soviet Union. Yes, in other words. Professor LOMAGIN, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Gevorg, and it's a big pleasure to be with you. And of course, as you can understand, within 10 minutes, it's very difficult to cover, such a broad issue as a relationship with China and post-Soviet space. But I will start with debates, which are taking place in not only in international relations domain, but also among politicians, in order to understand that Russia's relationship with China is a part of a global context, right? And if we read what American political scientists think about the new world, and Professor KURILLA has described his views that it's Yalta order is over, but what do we see instead? And a lot of people believe that we witness emerging Sino-American bipolarity, and in this context, the key question is on whose side Russia will be, right? And given the most recent developments in relationship between Moscow and Beijing, experts believe that Russia is getting China's junior partner. And if we focus on the Arctic, for instance, or post-Soviet space, the Chinese expansion and its willingness to become an important player in the Arctic is just for the sake of gaining access to region's natural resources, creating transportation and communication infrastructure, and developing a shortcut between East Asia and Europe. So actually, China is very pragmatic in what it's doing, and the key question would be how to define Chinese policy towards Russia, and what is Russia's take on it, whether Russia is really agreed with what is said, or Russia is trying to somehow offset initiatives by Chinese side. And if we read one of the most vivid critics of China, John Mersheimer from University of Chicago, in his numerous articles and books and public speeches, he put it simply. He says that China cannot rise peacefully, which means that China will do its best, and is doing its best, to use vulnerability or weaknesses of all countries, including Russia, and through this to challenge at some point of time the United States. And there is a maybe marginal part of academic works which look at Russia-Chinese relationships through the prism of China as a potential role model, or maybe existing role model for Russia, especially given the fact that China has been rising by 10% almost for 30 years, and this Chinese miracle is worth to be studied. And of course, what are ingredients of this miracle? It's political stability, very strong central authority, control of commanding heights in economy, so-called national champions. And this might also give Russia sort of a chance to catch up developed countries in the future. My second point would be just to figure out basically what's happening, and to what extent these propositions or those ideas, those debates are true or not. And of course, everything which I will tell you, it's rather speculative, but some issues are very tangible. And this one important tangible result in relationship between Russia and China is that countries which used to be foes during Cold War, right? And we do remember that was a harsh territorial dispute. There was a competition for predominance and the communist movement, etc., etc. Within 30 years or so, they have managed to reach a level of strategic partnership, right? So they managed to find a solution by making mutual concessions on a number of issues, very serious issues, border demarcation, which took, almost 18 years, demilitarization, the remnants of the Cold War era. And nowadays, China is the largest Russia's trading partner, and the trade turnover between the two countries is larger than $100 billion US. And we do see that the ties that bind Moscow and Beijing are really strong. Both countries, share the view on the world as a multipolarity. At least maybe it's just a lip service being played by China, but at least China would like to be pole for sure. Russia would like to be a pole for sure, right? Both countries are not happy with American hegemony, right? They do not accept this hegemony. We do see a complementarity on energy. Russia is abundant with energy resources on one hand. It's not only oil and gas, it's also nuclear power capability and the willingness of China to increase in the energy mix the share generated by nuclear power stations. Military technology is vital. China would like to be, a world power, and Russia's potential and in many fields is vital for Chinese ambitions and security in general, domestic security, the way how they perceive, both countries perceive, issues, such as fighting separatism. It's a key. So at the same time, we should be quite, to be in a cold blood mode, and we should understand that both countries learned that nations don't have allies, right? So actually, we do remember a famous saying that, which is attributed to Alexander III, that, Russia has only two allies, its army and navy. And of course, the same goes with China. China would like to have a free hand. So we do not expect, at least at the moment, military alliance or a military partnership between the two countries. And now I will look at two areas within, a remaining few minutes in the Arctic context. So, to what extent those who said that Russia is becoming a junior partner of China in the Arctic. I think that this assumption is wrong, basically, because China is a newcomer. China began its geopolitical activity in the high north relatively late, right? And only 7+ years ago, they advanced this the Belt and Road Initiative, and even later Silk Road to Europe, which basically deals with the use of Northern Sea Route. Yes, of course, China has legitimate concerns as a global power about climate change, freedom of navigation, including the Arctic. And here we see, some kind of discontent. China does see Northern Sea Route, at least in the publications, academic publications, as a part of high seas, which should be open for navigation. But we also should to keep in mind that China enjoys the status of observer within the Arctic Council. It does not have a seat at the Arctic High Table, right? And in order to get this status of observer, China had to accept, first of all, the status of Northern Sea Route. It had to accept, the supremacy of United Nations Convention of Law on Seas. And basically, they had to, accept the Russian way of interpreting how the Northern Sea Route can be used. For Russia, importance of Arctic is fourfold. Again, I will not just go into detail. Security, of course, development of natural resources, and the Arctic is viewed as a major resource base for development of Russian oil and gas, access to Atlantic Ocean in general, and of course, navigation via the Northern Sea route. Okay, in terms of CIS and Central Asia context, again, I will just follow up what Professor KURILLA said. Even though that the era of spheres of influence is over, the most recent article by Graham Allison was quite provoking in Foreign Affairs magazine. I think that's, our colleagues had a chance to read it. And basically, Allison made a point that until recently, the whole world was a sphere of influence on one country, namely United States. And today, we do see a change of this paradigm. And Russia, of course, would like to be, a predominant power in its backyard. And for Russia, of course, Eurasian Union, CSTO relationship with Belarus, it's a top priority in all foreign policy concept, in all leading documents by Russia, you can see it. So for Russia, it's a pole in global politics. So not only Russia itself, but Russia's led integration groupings. And why Central Asia is important? Central Asia is important basically just for one simple reason. Of course, it's maybe oversimplification, but China is thirsty for energy resources. And in order to, meet energy insecurity challenge, it's much easier and much safer to buy from neighbors, from Kazakhstan, from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Russia, including Russia. So this is a key, basically, point which explains Chinese rationale why Central Asia is vital. And of course, the willingness to diversify experts, including from Central Asia, makes potential conflicts between Russia and China. And Russia is trying to minimize Chinese influence in the region. And as you see on this slide, Russia, also encouraged India, yet another outsider, to enter Central Asian energy market to balance and reduce impact of China in Central Asia. And my final slide, which deals with the future. Of course, we might expect that there will be growing asymmetry in power, right? And power is a key variable, right? It's both economic power and military power, and nobody knows what might happen in 5 or 10 years from now. Of course, domestic politics or domestic stability or net instability might be enormous trigger for future relationship. If, for instance, any of two became politically unstable, it would give a serious leverage in relations. And the role of third actors, including United States, Japan, India, are also vital for Russian-Chinese relationship. But I would say that given all concerns, including that Russia is economically less important for China than, let's say, United States, Japan, or European Union, still I think that Russia and China have reached a point, I would say, of no return. So the relationship are really solid, and both countries are benefiting greatly from this mature strategic partnership. And of course, in diplomatic bilateral relations or international relations, there are no ideal marriages, right? So there are no ideal husbands or ideal wives. So actually, the tensions can grow from time to time. The problem is that whether or not diplomats or decision makers would be able to just handle those issues when they see emerging problems. I'll stop on this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor LOMAGIN. And we will quickly move to Professor Tatiana Romanova, who will speak on Russia-EU relations, their current problems, I guess, and their prospects. Thank you. The floor is yours, Dr. Romanova.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gevorg. Yes, indeed, I will speak about EU-Russian relations. And I will start actually where Professor KURILLA stopped. I will just start with this slide, which demonstrates one of the most recent, in fact, visit of the foreign policy representative of the European Union to Russia. And you see Mr. Lavrov and Josep Borrell. And that visit was actually widely portrayed in both Russia and the European Union as a symbol of the profound crisis in EU-Russian relations, when Russia basically said that the European Union doesn't want to cooperate with Russia, and therefore is seen in Russia as a very unreliable partner. And the European Union basically said that, well, Russia doesn't want to do it the way the European Union feels is correct. Yeah, and that brings me to my first point, which I call vicious normative competition, but that's that links very nicely with what Professor KURILLA described as competition about the future of the world order, of how the world order will be set up. Yeah, with the European Union insisting on rules-based international order and multilateralism, reminding Russia of the Paris Charter for New Europe, of its obligations there, including obligation about the non-violation of borders. With the European Union reminding about democracy, human rights, and the rule of law as the key values to be respected, and with widely publicizing disinformation threat coming from Russia. So the disinformation is probably one of the keywords in EU-Russian relations of today. And therefore, the European Union believes that Russia poses, in a way, a revisionist challenge to the liberal world order. And as a result, no business as usual is the message that the European Union portrays to Russia. The European Union says, okay, the relations are basically on hold. There can be no business as usual for the time being. Well, Russia's attitude is different. So Russia, and that came very vividly in the speech on the 5th of February, which picture I demonstrated in the beginning. Mr. Lavrov insists on Russia respecting international law, and that is understood slightly different from what the European Union puts forward as rules-based international order. In fact, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs denies viciously this rules-based international order concept, believing that that's different from international law and gives the West an upper hand in interpreting how to apply international law. Russia stresses that there is a need, stresses mutual respect and equality, and believes that the European Union does not grant this equality. And that's actually in stark contrast with Russian-Chinese relations, for example. And that's and this is always contrasted when Russian representatives speak, and they say, well, that when we speak with China, the relations are obviously based on mutual respect and equality. When we speak with the European Union, we don't have it. And therefore, there is a lot of criticism coming from that. Russian policymakers believe that values are respected, but values should be implemented with a due account of national culture, national habits, national traditions. And in that sense, if you take a Russian view, then the challenge is not revisionist, but rather neo-revisionist, in the sense that it's not so much about the principles of the current world order, but rather about the role of Russia in this world order, about whether Russia can interpret the values, about whether Russia has the veto power at the table where key decisions are taken. And then the conclusion is thus that, well, look, you refer to the business as usual, but we actually don't want the business as usual the way you understand it. Yeah, we want a different business. Yeah, so therefore, sort of like no business as usual is not a threat for us. Yeah? And that means sort of like this vicious normative competition, or this lack of understanding about how the world will function, yeah, in the long run, is a barrier for long-term relations between Russia and the European Union as well. You know? So the business as usual was destroyed. Yeah? So we previously had such concepts as partnership, modernization, free trade area. That's now gone. Yeah? But there is no business, there's no sort of like understanding what can be the new business as usual. You know? So what can be new business that Russia and the European Union will share sort of like in the longer run. Yeah? So there is no this longer term perspective in EU-Russian relations. Yeah? Unlike in the relations between Russia and China, for example. You know? And both the EU and Russia are silent about that. The European Union says, well, look, we're not going to start any discussion on that before you implement the Minsk agreements. Yeah? So that's a prerequisite. Yeah? And once you are there, we can start the discussion. And Russia says, well, look, sort of like, we're ready, like whenever and wherever you're ready to cooperate. Yeah? And well, we have our vision of the Minsk agreements, and actually it's sort of like up to Ukraine to start that, and then we'll sort of like see how that goes. Yeah? So the visions are completely different. Yeah? That is sort of like the situation is further worsened by the fact that Russia and the European Union do not have any immediate need in each other. Yeah? So they can actually survive with the relations with the way they are now. Yeah? So there's nothing that sort of like impedes the survival, yeah, of the two actors. Yeah? And then both Russia and the European Union feel that the time is on their side. Yeah? That as the time goes, that's sort of like in the longer run, they will have an advantage. Yeah? With Russia believing that sort of like that the world order is in a transformation, yeah? And therefore Russia just like has to wait and see how the situation will sort out, and will sort out anyways to the advantage of Russia. Yeah? And the European Union believes that sort of the key of the problem is Russia's internal politics. Yeah? And therefore, sooner or later, internal transformations will take place in Russia, and therefore the European Union has to wait until that time. Yeah? So no immediate need for each other, and a profound belief that the time is on their side. Yeah? In the meantime, yeah, so we do have sanctions, yeah, and just to sort of like rephrase Henry Kissinger, sanctions serve as an alibi for both sides, like for the absence of policy. Yeah? So both the EU and Russia introduced sanctions. Russia, in fact, replied to the EU's sanctions, yeah, and the sort of like effect of sanctions is profound. Yeah, so I have a long list. I will probably go like very schematically through the points due to the shortage of time, and then we can come back to that. Yeah? But basically, we do not have regular contacts because of that. Sort of like the whole institutional structure is on hold. Yeah? We do have ad hoc meetings here and there, but most sort of like regular fora of EU-Russian relations are frozen. Yeah? Sanctions, in fact, served like to sort of like worked so as to consolidate the political regime in Russia, solidify sort of like the political regime. Yeah, and sanctions definitely served as a symbol. Yeah, sort of like they sort of like they send a signal that the European Union is not happy, you know, with what Russia does internationally. But sanctions did not in any way alter Russia's foreign policy. You know? So what we, however, see is that there is a profound sort of like economic disengagement between Russia and the European Union. The European Union as a trade bloc is still the biggest trade partner of Russia. Yeah? And the EU member states do not trade individually, so we have to take the European Union as a bloc. And as a bloc, it still accounts for about 40% of Russia's external trade. Yeah? But at the same time, sort of like the trade balance fluctuates in line with sort of like the pricing of natural resources. Yeah? So we had a considerable decrease of trade balance between Russia and the European Union due to the fall of oil and gas prices. And then it sort of like it picked up. However, the trade balance between Russia and the European Union and economic links between Russia and the European Union also suffer from what is called in Russia, Russia's pivot to the east. So Russia trying to rebalance its trade balance in favor of Asia. And that sort of and that's something that accompanies EU's sanctions and sort of like reinforces this disengagement. The policy of import substitution that Russia introduced following the 2014 sanctions also serves to sort of like decrease this interdependence between Russia and the European Union. And then the third point that works in the same direction is the EU's energy transition and the growing reliance on renewables and energy efficiency, and the plan to sort of like decrease the consumption of certainly oil and then in the longer run natural gas. So just to sort of like to remind you that the biggest part of the trade balance, of the EU-Russian trade balance, is made of natural resources. So 70% comes from hydrocarbons. So the EU's energy transition definitely works in the direction of sort of like easing and sort of like decreasing this energy of this trade economic interdependence between Russia and the European Union. Well, economic losses from sanctions are present on both sides here, and on the Russian side, these sort of like the effect is more profound. And then, of course, sanctions did lead to some, well, to inflation on the side of Russia and to the depreciated standards of living. What is also important in terms of sort of like the US here is that US secondary sanctions to a large extent limit the EU's flexibility with sanctions. And therefore, the EU's secondary sanctions also limit EU's activeness in its relations with Russia. And therefore, that means sort of like that at the end of the day, EU-Russian relations to a large extent depend on US-Russian relations as well. So what is the way forward? So we will probably see some selective engagement. We will definitely see some selective engagement in politics, in well, issues which can be defrosted now, with the Biden administration, like the Iran nuclear deal, like the Middle East. So both Russia and the European Union are involved, especially, well, the Iran nuclear deal is particularly dear to the European Union. So we'll probably see more selective engagement there. Maybe a bit in Syria, maybe a bit in Libya, because the European Union is very much concerned with something that is called Astanization of conflict resolution, where Russia and Turkey basically get the deal behind the EU's back, with very little involvement of the West. So that sort of like concern will stimulate EU sort of like Russian cooperation in this field. Russia and the European Union are sort of like in a very similar positions when it comes to the US-China competition. But that does not stimulate more cooperation between Russia and the European Union, because in this competition, sort of like both try to sort of like find more or less a neutral position, with the European Union concerned about preserving special relations with the United States, and with Russia, of course, more concerned about sort of like preserving good relations with China. So therefore, sort of like, despite the fact that Russia and the European Union are in a very similar position in relation to the US sort of like Chinese competition, that does not sort of like lead to their sort of like to the increase in their cooperation in this field. There is some potential in economic cooperation, in selective engagement when it comes to economic cooperation. We will probably see, well, continuation of existing trade relations, especially when it comes to natural gas. Well, there is a lot of talk now about EU-Russian cooperation and energy transition, and on the Kyoto Protocol, especially in terms of sort of like public awareness campaigns, in terms of joint projects, But so far, it has been more about exploratory talks at different levels, at expert levels, but also at official levels. We know that Russian officials, in fact, explore possibilities of sort of like advancing this cooperation, but at the same time, sort of like shielding that cooperation from sanctions. There might be some cooperation on vaccination, maybe on Arctic, and maybe on standardization. So these are sort of like issues that both Russia and the European Union see as depoliticized and therefore as sort of like open for selective engagement. And then there might be some people-to-people contacts. At least the European Union bets heavily on that. However, we've seen a lot of geopoliticization of civil society cooperation on both sides. With Russia, it's linked to the sort of like foreign agent legislation. In the European Union, it's sort of like linked to the disinformation campaigns and sort of like Russia's finance of national extreme left and right parties. Yet there are things that can be done here in terms of research cooperation, in terms of education exchanges, and maybe in terms of civil society cooperation in currently depoliticized areas like energy transition or environmental cooperation. So three sort of like potential areas of selective engagement, which, however, will not alter sort of like the poor quality of EU-Russian relations the way we have it now, with the absence of a longer-term perspective. I will stop it here. So a bit of self-promotion, like our book, well, the book that I edited on EU-Russian relations is about to be released by Routledge. So you're more than welcome to have a deeper look on EU-Russian relations with the help of this book.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Romanova. Once again, I would kindly ask all the colleagues to follow the chat. It takes me, I think I will never stop you from talking and interrupt you. So all I can do is just writing to you in the chat, asking to limit the time. But also, once again, please keep in mind that we still have the second part of the event for more details, and also for engaging into dialogues of several types, right? Where I think it will be more lively. I would also like to ask our viewers, and I see that actually some people are watching it with us, to prepare for their comments or questions. Now we're moving to the second part of our seminar today, with more focus on Japan now. And the first talk will be by Professor Akio Takenaka from the University of Tokyo. He will talk for the first time about Japan-US relations under the Biden administration, and Japan-China relations, I think, with also a little bit of China-Russia relationships related remarks, right? So again, technically 10 minutes. I understand it's really hard to follow, but let's try to follow with that. 10 or 12, okay?
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. AVETIKYAN. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the European University in St. Petersburg and the Japanese consulate there. It's already a year and a half since me, together with Professor Takenaka, visited your beautiful town. We kind of dream of it. It was in the summer, and we spent very lovely days when we visited you. So it's great to meet you in this fashion, and I very much look forward to the discussion that we're having later. But let me first of all present to you my views on the prospects for Japan-US relations under the Biden administration and Japan-China relations. Well, there's not much time. I shouldn't give too much trouble to you. It's very difficult to be a moderator. I understand fully. So let me just dive into the discussion. First of all, when we look into Japan-US relations, the bigger context, as it were, as we all know, is US-China relations. And as many people have been discussing, I agree that the strategic competition between the US and China will intensify. It's not going to go away. It's not going to stay the way it is, but rather there's no way to avoid the intensification of the strategic competition even under the Biden administration. Now, that one of the flashpoints is Taiwan, and the US, just before the end of the Trump administration, published the document that Mr. McMaster, General McMaster, signed in 2018, and it shows the commitment the US has to defending Taiwan. But it's not only on the US side, but on the Chinese side too. We understand that China is determined to compete with the United States. If you see the budget for this year, it's quite clear. Well, this year and last year, you know, despite the problems that China is having with COVID, the rate of increase in their defense budget has been outstanding. You know, last year it was 6.6%. This year it's 6.8%. And when we compare these figures to the rise or the decrease in the budget for diplomacy, for example, which was minus 11.8% last year, it is minus 1.9% this year. You know, the overall expenditure of the central government is going to decrease even this year too. But in that context, still, it's quite outstanding that they have decided to increase their defense budget by 6.8%. So they're quite determined about this race with the United States. But, however, we also understand that between the US and China, there is also cooperation, and there will be more cooperation, which is very likely under the Biden administration, because it has already been mentioned, the Biden administration is more inclined towards multilateralism in many areas, including climate change and global health and so on and so forth. And on those international platforms, it is for sure that Biden will try to cooperate with Xi Jinping. And at the same time, bilaterally, do the American businesses want to leave China? Of course they don't. The Shanghai American Chamber of Commerce has conducted a survey last year in the summer, which showed that 92% of the American businesses there have no intention of leaving China. And even the Trump administration, we all know about the very heavy sanctions that they imposed upon China. But if we listen to the second speech by Vice President Pence on China, it clearly manifested that decoupling is not what they are promoting. You know, decoupling happens in certain areas, in the high-tech area. But if we see the so-called first stage agreement on economic issues that was signed by both sides in January of 2019, it becomes very clear that what the Americans want is really an opening up of the Chinese market to the American firms. And it's not a decoupling altogether at all. So the Chinese, on their side, have also changed their terminology. You may have noticed, because in the past, when they talked about the new type of major country relations, for example, they only talked about good things, nice things, things that are easy to hear, like no confrontation, you know, mutual respect, win-win relationship, cooperation. But nowadays, they also talk about competition. Yeah? You cannot avoid competition. The Chinese have started to talk about the competition side of the relationship of the United States. So now we can say that we are all in the same boat. Now we know that competition and cooperation, they both have to go at the same time. Okay? So I call it the two-pronged approach. That is, in our approach towards a rising China, we have to compete with them on the one hand, but also cooperate with them on the other. For Japan, for example, we have no choice because the Chinese come towards us. You know, their maritime advancement is real. They are exerting pressure on Japan in the East China Sea, and they are attempting at changing the status quo by physical force. Let me show you this chart here. It shows the records of the intrusions of the Chinese government and other vessels into Japanese territorial sea around the Senkakus, what the Chinese call the Diaoyu. And as you can see, in 2008 December, that was the first time the Chinese government vessels intruded into the territorial waters for the purpose of asserting sovereignty. And when the two countries, Japan and China, clashed over the Senkakus, when the Japanese government decided to purchase 3 of the 5 major islands from a private landlord, then China seized the opportunity and started to move in a physical, started to make physical moves in this way, as you can see in the chart. So the red shows the number of vessels that actually come inside the territorial waters, and the blue lines show the number of vessels that come into the contiguous zones around the territorial waters. Now, these are Chinese Coast Guard vessels, but behind there are, of course, Chinese naval vessels very close. So therefore, for us, while increasing the budget for the self-defense forces and the Coast Guards in a very small way, because we have our fiscal problems, there is no choice but to reinforce our alliance with the US and our alliance network with other friendly countries. Now, this shows the rise in the Chinese defense budget, comparing it to the defense budget that we have. Now, China's defense budget, even the announced ones, 2.5 times bigger than Japan's. However, that's the competition side of things. But at the same time, we do have a lot of cooperation. So globalization, despite the decoupling and the problems that we are facing today, I would say the general trend is well established, and it is still at work even today. And therefore, the economic interdependence that we have with China deepens every day, on the other hand, right? So you may have noticed that at the end of last year, the countries in the East Asian region, we successfully concluded the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership negotiations, and that's a very big achievement as far as the Japanese and the member countries are concerned, including China, of course. And you may have noticed that Xi Jinping has been expressing his willingness to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, and that is very welcome from our point of view. And we sincerely hope that the United States, which had been a promoter of this under the Obama administration, when Trump came to power, the first thing he did was to cancel America's participation in the TPP, but we hope the US will also come back to this agreement. Yeah, China is a very important trading partner for Japan, as this table shows. Even in the midst of COVID, our export to China increased, while our export to other areas decreased by a great deal. So let me, at the end of my initial presentation, explain the challenges that we all face. The two-pronged approach, as I told you, competition and cooperation, is contradictory. Yeah, it is inherently contradictory. So we must have the resilience, the wisdom to live with this contradiction and live through this contradiction. It's not easy psychologically. And to strike a balance between cooperation and competition is increasingly difficult. Why? Because competition will intensify, as I said, and cooperation will deepen at the same time. So our nations, including Russia's, I believe, including China, including the US, of course, including Japan, our nations will be divided as to how we should deal with a rising China, and we shall need to use a lot of time and energy on internal coordination and internal persuasion. So that's the end of my initial remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Takahara. Thanks for your very interesting talk and the challenges and questions that you posed. I think they're going to be very much a part of our discussion shortly. I will now pass the word to Professor Shiharu Takenaka from Rikyo University with her talk on prospects for relations with other great powers, I think with more focus on India and the Japanese foreign policy initiative of free and open Indo-Pacific, and that The floor is yours, Professor Takanaka. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you see the PowerPoint? All right. Yes. Okay. I talk about the given title, prospects for relations with other great powers. Others, actually, I talk for, and including India, which I have been studying for a long time. Okay. How can I? Sorry. Oh, the focal points of my talk is, I just summarized 5 points. The first point is about the framework of international relations, power shift and volatility especially in Asia. In other words, China's rise or encompassing, growth, and also American retreat, especially in at the time of Trump administration. And right now, we are not sure how President Biden will do the reconstruction of American foreign policy and strategic commitment. And the second is more about Asia and Eurasia. The second point is about international politics, international relations on the land. So continental Eurasia is the second point. And the third point is about sea, international politics on the sea, maritime international relations of the Indo-Pacific. I think both are very, very important in the coming decade. And the fourth is, as all the speakers are talking about, increasing power competition, and we are probably losing the balance of international relations. But I would talk about the big threes about China, India, Japan, in Asia. And the fifth is just my closing remark. And this sheet is on the power shift and volatility, and China's rise and American retreat, and probably Japanese decline is also here. And within those 3 decades, 1990s, 2000, 2010s, very, very big changes have happened in this area and in the world. And 1990s, post-Cold War and post-USSR, and 2000, or a little bit before 2000, nuclear proliferation in South Asia, and also American war in Afghanistan and later Iraq, and changed really big balance in this region. And 2010s, this is primarily after the Lehman shock, actually world financial crisis, and China's overwhelming power economically, and also China's advancement in the field of strategic, security area, and American retreat from various domains like strategic commitment and also economic commitment or other affairs very clear at the time of Trump administration. And we are now in 2020s, and we are living in the process of pandemic international relations, but also pandemic economic crisis. So we are seeing what will happen next, at the time of the new administration in the United States. And the second point, I gave you the image, and this is Eurasia and continental international relations. And I think all of you know much more than me, but I will just do it naively. And this is a map of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And you can see it's very, very big area of international relations. And at the same time, you can see main countries of the used to be called BRICS, except Brazil and China, South Africa, 3 countries, Russia, India, China, gather here. And as other people say, because Russia and Central Asia have big resource of energy, oil and natural gas, and China or other Asian emerging economies needs energy. So pipeline politics or other energy related things are very big in this region. And also, of course, development, infrastructure building, etc., etc. And here, China's Belt and Road Initiative has been giving a very big impact on the region. And the other one is nuclear politics. As I said, here, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan are nuclear states. And also there are lots of proliferation issues like Iran, North Korea, or Israel, etc., are related in to this region. And how to keep the nuclear peace is a big issue here. And the other issue is wars and civil wars and fundamentalist movements, militants and terrorism, separatist movements, etc. And Russia, China, India share the issues. This is the Eurasian fronts. And here also transformation and balance of big threes, Russia, India, China, is one of the focus of our interest. And the third point is about Indo-Pacific. And in this new century, maritime international relations has been really emphasized by many policymakers, especially American policy, analysts. But there are lots of different views, and the left is Indian view about Indo-Pacific, and the right is American strategic view about Indo-Pacific. So lots of views are competing and coexisting. And there are lots of issues in the Indo-Pacific domain. And this is just some of them, but maritime security, freedom of the sea, like FOIP is emphasizing, and including non-traditional security, like piracy, robbery, terrorism, probably cyber security will be somewhere. And energy security and development is a very, very important issue because this is the sea lane for Japanese, economy. So we need this area safe enough for Japanese vessels to do the trade and import of energy resources. And natural disaster, environmental issues, and also global warming, climate change is really directly related to this region too. And 2004, Great Sumatra earthquake and tsunami, and of course, Japanese March 11th, tomorrow is a big disastrous and tragic day for us. But anyway, natural disaster and climate change, global warming and pollution, etc., is really, really related to this area. And immigrants, refugees, human trafficking, like Rohingya crisis or Afghan crisis, all those things are combined in this area. And those are really global common issues. So we need transnational, international cooperation. And the other aspect is many of you are already talking like balance of power or power competition. And right now, because Chinese expansion or advancement is very big, so other countries like status quo and countries like US or Japan, or probably Australia, are really careful about Chinese advancement. And also India, although it is also emerging economy and new power, are very careful about China. So right now it's said the Quad, US, Japan, Australia, and India, all of them are committed to democracy and also a liberal world and also security together. And this Biden administration is already has already made it clear that it will commit to this Indo-Pacific strategy and cooperation among Quad, and also they are going to have a meeting already. And today it was reported that Prime Minister Suga and Modi talked yesterday, and they confirmed Indo-Japan strategic partnership. But this idea is also provoked and also contested by other stakeholders' view about the Indo-Pacific. So it could be said that there is a multilateral talks about Indo-Pacific, like from Indonesia, Singapore, like ASEAN, or from Africa or Middle East, and also from European countries like UK, France, or other countries. They have interest in this region. So actually right now, Quad Plus is now seriously talking about how to make the framework of Indo-Pacific strategy. And actually, in fact, Russia is also the Pacific country, so Russia could be in this scenario. And the fourth point is about the rising tension, competition between many countries, but like especially big three in Asia, China, India, Japan. The left is Chinese fighter jets cross Taiwan Strait, and also Chinese activities around Senkaku Islands. Lots of border islands issues raised. And also, if you see Indian Ocean, actually China's movement and presence has been really expanded. The left is Sri Lanka, Hambantota port. Professor Takahara and I went together to this place some time ago. But right now, Chinese company gets the management right for almost a century because of the debt trap of Sri Lanka government. They can't pay back the money. And the right photo is about China-Maldives Friendship Bridge. And this also caused lots of issues. And the problem is debt trap, they can't pay back, and also lots of environmental issues. And also those things are related to the domestic political tension in Sri Lanka or Maldives. Or those things are happening in Indian Ocean countries, but also in the Pacific or in Africa, in many countries in the world right now. So India is really alert, naturally. And India says that we are squeezed by China like string of pearls. And this left is a map of that. We are squeezed by China, like in the coastline, but also in the Himalaya. And in these 3-4 years, actually since 1970, the border confrontation or tension become very alert between India and China. So alternatives of Russia and Japan, I would like to conclude. I'm sorry, I take too much time, but actually Japan and Russia can find lots of similarities and also lots of interest to do the win-win cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, maritime dimension, and also because Japan is outside of Eurasian politics, we can collaborate in many, many things. And to do that, I think it is definitely important to advance the friendly relationship between Russia and Japan economically and also diplomatically. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Takenaka. Thank you for your talk. And this is actually bringing us to a logical next and last presentation for this first part of the seminar. Professor Akio Takahara, I would like to ask you to present briefly in a few minutes about the most obvious for this seminar's topic today, but Russia-Japan relations and their foreign policies. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, I won't take too much time if I can get this right. Okay, finally, I'll talk briefly about what I think is missing in Japan-China relations under the new circumstances. But first of all, let me just briefly review the current situation. I'm very happy that over 200 projects already have been initiated under the so-called 8-point cooperation plan that exists between Japan and Russia. And on the political side, already 4 rounds of 2+2 dialogue between the foreign ministers and the defense ministers have taken place. This is about the political aspect of our relationship. And at the same time, I think both sides have learned from our experience during the Abe-Putin days when Prime Minister Abe was in power, that we shouldn't have too much expectations for quick results. So slow and steady wins the race. But let me just add one point from the Japanese point of view. I think we can share this with our Russian friends, but there are a lot of potential gains of a peace treaty if we can conclude one. Prime Minister Suga, our new Prime Minister, and Foreign Minister Motegi will keep on pursuing the conclusion of our peace treaty because it will bring about a big boost in the bilateral relations. It will completely turn over a new leaf in this very important relations, I should say, between Japan and Russia, these two big countries. And I am pretty sure that if it could be done, there will be a huge, what we will say in Japanese, Russia boom, a Russia boom, or a Russia fever, as it were, in Japan. And there will be great opportunities for ambitious business people on both sides of the newly clarified border. Those are only one or two of the potential gains of the peace treaty. There should be more cultural and social exchanges and so on and so forth. But I think it's important for both sides to recognize the big size of the potentiality that exists between our nations. So the missing link, where is it? I would say that it is the intellectual exchange between Japan and Russia. So let me pose to you a simple fact. There are so many Japanese academics who work on international relations. There are many analysts on international issues who have never visited Russia before. And so since a few years back, with the help of the Russia division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan, I've been organizing a study group every year. We couldn't do it last year because of COVID, but I'm trying to choose the scholars who have never been to Russia and make it a rule that during the study period, at least this person will visit Russia. That's how Professor Takenaka and I visited St. Petersburg a couple of years ago. But I would guess that a similar situation exists in Russia too. You know, you have a lot of excellent experts on the United States or India or China who have never visited Japan before. And that's, we are losing a lot by this lack of exchange between the intellectual forces of our societies. I am fully convinced that more exchange between us will contribute greatly to deepening our mutual understanding, and that will lead to the promotion of Japan-Russia relations. So a meeting like this is fantastic, I think, but we should expand this, you know, not only between a few of us, but we have to involve the greater part of our intellectual societies. And as a China expert, I would say that exchange is especially needed over China because the rise of China is a challenge on the one side and it's an opportunity on the other for both in Japan and Russia. That's how I see it. Of course, you gain a lot from your friendship with China. We do also, but we can never, lower our guards, you know. The Chinese can be very ambitious. We all understand that. We all have experiences in dealing with China for a long, long time. That's what I would emphasize about the importance of our exchange over China. We have long experience, we have ample experience, and therefore, by cooperating, by exchanging our views, we can actually contribute to the whole world. That's my belief. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Takahara, and thank you again to all the professors for their presentations. Now the floor is open for the panel discussion part and the questions, both for presenters among each other. So if you have any questions to one another, please feel free to either go ahead and ask them now or let me know about those in the chat section. I do see that we have several questions in the YouTube comment section, but we also had a question that had been sent to us previously. And before moving forward, I would like to ask all of the presenters, maybe very brief answers, up to 1 minute maybe, or 1.5 minutes, to let us try to set the grounds of what else do we mean by saying the new international circumstances. We did speak about a few. The new Biden administration has been at the center of it, but there are broader and more global issues, I think, right? We haven't touched upon so much about the COVID-19 and post-COVID world, let's say. Also the climate change, energy transition, questions like this. I'd like to hear very shortly your definitions of how do you define the new international circumstances, and how do they affect the international relations surrounding Russia and Japan? Thank you. In no particular order, please feel free to unmute your microphones.
Yeah, Gevorg, can I start? Yeah, because you've already listed, this several important issues and challenges like COVID-19 and probably other pandemics which we may face in the future, also climate change. But looking back on the economic and political reshuffling, we also can say that we live in the time of the relative decrease of American power. We can say that the United States is no more capable to be the only pole in the international system. The role it played for decades, well, we see that, well, what we saw during Trump administration was just a visual proof of the incapability of the United States to keep all the obligations, to economically keep the control over international security. And we see that American withdrawal from the global role is inevitable, but maybe not tomorrow, but the trend is towards that one. And that will be a different world, a world of not bipolar, not unipolar. Okay, multipolarity is a good world, but we do not understand yet what it means, what it will mean, and which multiple poles will emerge. So this is from the political point of view. Thanks.
Okay. So may I jump in? Yeah, actually, what do we mean by this new international circumstances? To me, it's not only about the United States, of course, which is under stress test. It's the West in general, European Union. And what do we see, and why we do need states to protect us, right? And when you see that states are not able to protect, right? Some more efficient, some less efficient, or at least there were very huge expectations, right? And I think that this is the combination of externalities or external challenges basically is reshaping, the global system in general. And, some countries are using momentum to fill the vacuum, right? So they go to different regions, to different countries, and this is one thing. The West, accumulating West, is fading as a power or as a attractive model, at least, right? And of course, how those challenges will interact with each other. Climate change was post-pandemic, or we didn't mention energy poverty at all. And for Russia, this is a huge issue. What's going to happen with coal, right? At some point, we say that, yes, there is a climate change, right? There is European Union, it's a willingness for energy transition, etc. But let us not forget about billions of those who live without electricity, right? And who will provide those countries with, the basics? So what about Millennium Development Goals, right? So should we revise the whole set of, basic issues which Kofi Annan, 20 years ago just outlined as a must for developed and developing countries. Thank you.
Okay, I will follow then. So we sort of like preserve the natural, like the original order, I guess. I agree that, like, first of all, it's global turbulence, yeah, and global turbulence in two different meanings. One is about the poles, yeah, but another one is about the rules, yeah, and the rules and the poles, in fact, sort of like are related, yeah, because firstly we have to sort of like, we'll be talking about which rules to apply and who interprets the rules, and who interprets the rules, in fact, links with the poles and with the hegemony, yeah, or sort of like decreasing hegemony and new poles, yeah, so it's the rules, who interprets the rules, and the poles. That's the first point, yeah. Secondly, it's about definitely it's about common challenges, yeah, and I think we already outlined them, but the problem, I guess, of today is that common challenges do not necessarily lead to cooperation, or at least they are not sort of like perceived as existential challenges. Yeah? And therefore, we talk about the geopolitics of energy transition, geopolitics of renewables, and geopolitics of the vaccine. Yeah, look how many speculations we have about the geopolitics of the Russian vaccine. Yeah? And then last but not least, it's definitely about the balance of international and national. Yeah? And again, we sort of like see a lot of discussions about sovereignty coming back. And even the European Union, which for long sort of like positioned itself as a post-sovereign polity, now talks about European sovereignty, yeah? So about re-establishing sovereignty at the supranational level. So this balance between national and international, sovereign and international cooperation will be pretty much in the agenda as well.
I think I'm just going to underline what Professor Romanova just said. Because on the one hand, there is the rise of global issues, COVID or warming or what have you. So there is a need, a rising need for nations to cooperate. But on the other hand, there's a rise of nationalism. There's a rise of geopolitical competition. So this contradiction is the challenge that we are facing now.
Should I? Okay, so I will talk a little bit longer than Takahara-san. But anyway, I think before and after of COVID-19 is really big, makes a very big impact on international, actually, balance of power, order, whatever. And because if you see the ranking of the cases and this, etc., US is the top. And India, Brazil, Russia, UK, France, and other European countries. So, in fact, G7 and also, lots of highly developed, affluent countries actually couldn't successfully overcome the pandemic. And in fact, East Asian developmental states like China and Vietnam communist states, and also Singapore, authoritarian democracy, maybe authoritarian regime, and also South Korea, Taiwan, more social democratic liberal democracies. Those countries have been very, very successful. So Japan is not very successful. So in fact, what kind of, what countries will make an impact as, successful soft power model? It's not US, because even inside US, they are fighting each other for a long, long time about the election, about the policy. And Japan is cannot hold the Olympic because of the chaotic situation. So anyway, the rise of China and rise of East Asian developmental states are really clear. So what will happen? We have to see, but for a long time, international society has been led by US or North American and EU leading countries. So, and UN has been relying on that thing, like rule of international society or, lots of norms of the international society, etc. So probably it will be changed. And it has been already changing, for the poorer countries, they need assistance. So China is making a corona, vaccine diplomacy, and Russia is also doing, India also doing. So lots of changes is happening already. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, dear professors. To continue and to pick up from where we left with the talk on the competition and cooperation and the possible, conflicting meanings of the two connotations, I'd like to propose to think a little bit, how much competition is at the core or at the DNA of development per se, be that within a state or in interstate relations, or is it something that can be overcome in general? I mean, can competition be totally removed and leaving the space only for cooperation? And in relation to that, I'd also like to bring up this connotation of what we call triangle relations when we were preparing for this seminar, and we've mentioned this as a possible term to discuss. There are several triangles that we can imagine in our mental mapping, and imagine at least three poles or powers which may have, forgive me for the simplification, but kind of love-hate relationships, right? So there is just examples. You don't have to focus on them, but there is the Russia and India and China so-called triangle. There could be Russia, China, and Japan, a triangle. EU, Russia, and the US, China, Russia. If I've missed anything, you can add any more. So again, in the perhaps the same order or any order that you prefer, could you comment on this? Competition and cooperation with a specific view on these triangles where there is both that you could view.
Okay, let me start. And this is first, sure, the competition is inevitable, and I would say more the international system cannot be chaotic for a long time. It's emerges as structured one, and usually there are structures with different poles, and it's always been like that. I mean, the structure could be different, it could be bipolar, multipolar, but it's never probably at least in the modern history there was just a unipolar world or just one world empire which can be the the opposition to the structural competition. So the structural competition includes not only economics but also politics and also the power competition. But what can be changed, and we already seen that after the Second World War there was a change in the nature of the competition, because well, the nuclear power with all of its fearful might and consequences also produced a lot of self-restriction from the great power. So the competition moved a little bit, at least the competition between big powers moved from the military to more of the political and economic. And this is already the change. So the nature of competition changes over history. So we can expect that it will continue to change, and will probably I would say that economy will get more and more importance within this types of competition. That is what I can say about triangles. Yeah, well, we here in Russia, we speak a lot about Russia, America, China triangle, but certainly it's not the only possible, not only possible way to imagine the international relations, and it's also okay, China, India, Russia triangle, if you still keep Russia as a part of this triangular figure. And this is but this is our imagination, I would say. This is something we use one or another triangle depending on what problem we're trying to solve. This is our mechanism of our thinking and how we imagine the international relations. Of course, we can always draw different figures on the world map, and each of the figures can be fruitful for some specific purposes we use. And this is how I think about this. Thanks.
Okay, a couple of words in terms of cooperation and competition. So why countries cooperate? This is one of two key IR theory questions, right? And of course, we cooperate when we see an added value. So we cooperate when we cannot handle the issue by ourselves, right? So when we meet a set of global challenges, especially when they just bombard us, simultaneously, right? We might expect this might be, a good foundation or prerequisite for cooperation, right? So if we see a complementarity, so China-Russia energy relationship, for instance, one country has abundant resources, another one is just looking for everything just to meet its energy needs. So cooperation, in my opinion, a lot will depend on the skills of diplomats, right? It's not up to business. It's not, and I would agree with what Tatiana said. Basically, the key issue is about what kind of rules will be applied, right? And, it's a very turbulent period of time. And some people would invoke WTO, right, for Russia-EU relationship, because we are member states. I wouldn't say that, the whole economic setup is just ruined because, Borrell and Lavrov, didn't find a common ground, and they were so gloomy at this press conference, right? So again, so what kind of rules we are going to apply? Secondly, so global challenges can divide us or can just make us work together. As for triangles, I think that when we discuss triangles, the key issue is whether those triangles is vehicles for stability. They are stable by nature or not, and which position every country of our interest, every power, right, or actor in case of European Union, is playing in those triangles. When we look at Russia-China-India triangle, for instance, at least it's my take on the situation. Russia has better relationship with both Beijing and Delhi than Beijing with Moscow and Delhi. So actually, Russia might, use this triangle to balance its position in Asia, right? So when we look at the triangle, Russia, European Union, and United States, Russian leaders made it clear many times that European Union is not an important subject. Many countries, yes, lost their sovereignty, right? And EU might be viewed in Russia as just a tool, foreign policy tool, in the hands of the United States. Of course, it's oversimplification. By this triangle is absolutely unstable. It's basically West versus Russia. It's not a triangle per se. At least when we look at security dimension and NATO as a major institution of transatlantic cooperation. Yeah, I'll stop on this. Thank you.
Yes, cooperation versus competition first. I don't think we can get rid of competition in international relations, because that's sort of like, that's one of the key features of international relations at the end of the day. And I mean, it's one of the key features of our world as well. At the end of the day, competition is a healthy feature if it is sort of like applied in good measure. Yeah, so it's all about like the sense of measure. Yeah, sort of like, and then even if you speak about the erstwhile allies like the United States and Europe, they still compete economically. Yeah? That does not prevent them from sort of like cooperating in strategic fields, on rules, but they still compete economically. Yeah, so that's normal. Yeah? And I guess we will always see it. Like the problem here is probably again in terms of where we compete, and do we compete on the basis of the rules that we all recognize, or do we compete in terms of what rules to apply? Yeah? And that's the big issue of global international relations. Triangles. Yes, I think triangles are something that is very dear to Russians. Yeah, so like we like imagining sort of like the world in sort of like triangle terms, and that's one of the justification for us that the world is moving to multipolarity. Yeah? And then I guess depending on the field, we can speak about different triangles. Yeah, we can speak about one type of triangles in economic fields. We can talk about different types of triangles in strategic and military fields, and so on, so else. Yeah. And again, sort of like triangles can be sort of like a means of competition, or it can be a means of cooperation. Yeah. So it's basically how you apply them. And it's at the end of the day, it's a very nice way to, well, it's simplification, but it's a nice way to conceptualize the trends that we see and to basically understand them and deal with them in the most efficient way.
Yes, I would like this time to echo what Professor Kurilla said. That is, competition is unavoidable, but it's very important to avoid using force. Because in the last century, we fought two terrible, horrendous wars. And human beings have learned huge lessons from those terrible wars, that we should not solve conflicts by physical force. So that's the basic line. You know, peace is the basic value that we all share and treasure. And whoever goes against that should be condemned by the whole international society, I would say. That's point number one. And about triangular relations, why hasn't the triangular relation between Japan, Russia, and China has not been cultivated? One big stumbling block, of course, is North Korea, geographically. We have to solve the North Korea problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree with Takahara-san. I think we should, you know, think about how to keep the peace and avoid the big war, actually. And luckily, the Cold War ended without the big war between US and USSR. But we had a big wars in 20th century. And right now, the confrontation between United States and China is not very easy to overcome. And also, what is problem is Chinese advancement is really changing the situation at, you know, around the border of China with neighboring countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and also Vietnam and India, Bhutan, etc., etc. So fortunately, Russia has a peaceful relationship with China, you know, based on the settlement between Russia and China. So, for example, to overcome the outbreak of war between India and China, that's really important. Russia is a very, very important partner for India. And actually that happened last year, you know, before the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Moscow. Actually, India could rely on Russia. And after that, Russia-India relationship is not very well right now, but because Indian armament comes from Russia and they need Russia support. So Russia has a really important key, you know, power about China and India peace. And of course, to keep, you know, India-China peace is very, very important for Japan too. Japan doesn't want to have a war against China. So in fact, you know, to overcome the danger of the war surrounding area of China, I think Japan, Russia have a common interest, and also they can find the, I use the word complementarity, you know, Professor LOMAGIN, we need to, we can find a way to, you know, to find a way to accommodate the situation and to make, you know, difficult to have a solid balance, but to find them, you know, way to muddling through the situation, and not to have the major confrontation between China, Russia, and Quads. You know, that's very, very important. And to do that, we need to have the cooperation of other partners like EU or etc. Or so anyway, I think Japan, Russia should do many things together. That's my point. Okay, thank you.
Right, dear colleagues, it's 11:55 here in St. Petersburg, so we have only 5 minutes, but I asked the professors and some of them replied. We may take another, at maximum, 10 more minutes until 12:10 in St. Petersburg or Moscow. But before that, I think Tatiana Romanova may have to leave us a bit earlier. So before we let her go, I will like to take a break from the focus that we've been discussing here and just ask a question that emerged here on Russia-EU relations. And there was a rather specific question about potential further relationships of Russia with the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe and its membership in the Council of Europe. This is as an extreme example of potential end of cooperation. What is your estimation of this worst case scenario, Dr. Romanova? That's a question from the audience.
Yeah, I guess it's a difficult question, isn't it? And a very topical for Russia, because of course the issue is, well, the Council of Europe is one organization where sort of like Russia and many European countries, in fact, participate on equal footing, something that is very important for Russia. And the Council of Europe, of course, is best known for its Charter on Human Rights, but it has a wider application because it sort of like contributes to legal approximation in Europe in general. Yeah? And the present sort of like Russia and the Council of Europe relations have not been easy recently, with the rights of the Russian parliamentary delegation being suspended even for some time. Now Russian members of the parliament are back, but the new issue is the issue of the most recent ruling of the European Court of Human Rights that says that Navalny, who was accused of sort of like, well, of a number of things in Russia, has to be released immediately, yeah? Which, well, basically links to the previous case that he had appealed in the Council of Europe, and to his present condition, because it's also motivated by the fact that his health is, and he himself personally is under the threat in the Russian prison system. And the Russian authorities refused to do that and evoked the possibility of sort of like leaving the Council of Europe. Yeah? And well, in terms of the consequences, the potential consequences, the only loser will be probably Russia, and more specifically Russian civil society. Yeah? So that's quite clear. This is also one of the decisions that might actually sort of like some parties in the West can easily take, yeah, to sort of like show that Russia violates a number of human rights and therefore has to be punished. But at the same time, it will sort of keep this like cooperation competition balance in favor of more competition and in favor of more disengagement, which is definitely not sort of like, does not favor anybody in Europe, be it at the governmental or at the societal level. Yeah? I think Russia will not take a radical step of leaving the Council of Europe, yeah, that's for sure. But Russia will probably for the time being use its court decisions and court interpretations to demonstrate that it does not have to apply the rulings of the European Court of Justice, of the European Court of Human Rights, sorry. Yeah? This is what has already been done by the Moscow court, yeah, which basically said that the ruling of the present ruling of the European Court of Human Rights cannot be applied in Russia. Yeah. And this is probably the strategy that Russia will use, sort of like not implementing the decisions, yeah, but not leaving the Council of Europe forever. Yeah. Maybe some funding to the Council of Europe will be suspended as well. Yeah. So Russia has already evoked that threat previously. Yeah. So Russia can do that again. Yeah. But I don't see sort of like any radical solution on the horizon, at least now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romanova. And I'll pass on to the next major point that returns us again to cooperation. And instead of triangles, this time I have an initiative which includes at least 4, I think. Yeah, it's the Free and Open Indo-Pacific initiative. or foreign policy principle of Japan. I'd like to ask actually both our Japanese colleagues, to comment a little bit more on the expected role of Japan in the new international circumstances, with a specific focus on FOIP. Also, perhaps their expectations of Russia. How does Russia fit, if at all, into that new into that initiative? And also, I'd like to hear, obviously, from my Russian colleagues on the free and open Indo-Pacific. Let's view Russia as also a Pacific state and power, after all.
Thank you for a very good question, and thank you for the opportunity to explain a little bit about FOIP. Because FOIP was a concept that was coined by the Japanese when Prime Minister Abe attended TICAD, that is TICAD, Tokyo International Conference on African Development in Kenya. He made the statement that we have a vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific, that is the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. These are the two oceans that connect the two vibrant continents of the world. They are Africa and Asia. So Japan intends to do our contribution so that these two areas, two continents can be connected better by constructing high quality infrastructure. And we would like to promote free navigation, rule of law, so that we can facilitate the exchange between these two great continents. So the free and open Indo-Pacific vision has two aspects. One is the strategic aspect, the maritime safety aspect of it, and the other is the cooperation, the economic cooperation aspect. And this concept, of course, is not exclusive. It's an inclusive concept. So countries like Russia would be most welcome to take part. Countries like China would be most welcome to take part. And personally, I think the Belt and Road Initiative that the Chinese have been promoting and FOIP are not exclusive to each other. So we are compatible. Both concepts are like constellations in the sky. They are images. What's real are the projects. They are the stars. The stars are tangible. So if we share projects, it means that two constellations share a star, or share two stars, or share three stars. No problem whatsoever. So Mr. Abe has already said that we can cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative on certain conditions. So we hope that Xi Jinping will say the same, that China can cooperate with FOIP, the Japanese version of the FOIP vision.
Okay, I will make a very brief comment because Takahara-san explained already fully, and I think Indian Indo-Pacific cooperation, but also wider than that, I think we can cultivate, for example, Russia, Japan, to challenge the climate change, global warming, and worsening situation of natural disaster and pollution, etc., nuclear accident, trans accident, etc. Not the very, very political issue. Of course, both countries have a difference, but beyond the political regime, lots of people, like young people of civil society, are really, really interested in climate change. And also how to struggle with the natural disaster is really, immediate situation. So I think to think about the security strategy and to think about, trade war is very, very difficult to overcome, but to involve lots of young people and citizens beyond the difference of the political situation, maybe environmental issues, a good point to start to do with, for example, Russia and Japan. I don't know the difference of the interest, but Russia and Japan. And luckily, this today's government of Japan is showing the interest in, environmental policy and diplomacy, and also, global warming. So maybe that could be a kind of, starting point or breakthrough, to overcome other difficult issues. Yeah, that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Professors LOMAGIN, KURILLA, Romanova, if you have anything to add on FOIP.
Yeah, of course, I'm not a big specialist in this issue, but what's basically is important, it's Russia's take on multilateral institutions in general. So Russia feels well when it's one of founding members, right, of an institution. It's like United Nations, right? So this is basically how you perceive international institutions as foreign policy tools or arena for cooperation, etc. So from this perspective, I would be quite pessimistic. At the same time, the second reason of pessimism, at least at the moment, is that this institution, if I understood Professor Takahara correctly, will be a norm-setter, right? There would be yet another center of power, which will be quite worrisome for Russia, because Russia already had some difficulties, as Professor Romanova said, in relationship with European Union, right? And it's quite uncomfortable situation. On the other hand, I would say that every institution which will balance China to some extent is a good news, right? So we see, at least my first reaction to Indo-Pacific cooperation or concept is it has both pros and cons for Russia, and maybe that's why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not very quick in providing its response. It's just they still sit and wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, if no more comments, there's another one, the elephant in the room, of course, that's on the Russian-Japanese relations and the much expected peace treaty between Russia and Japan and the territorial disputes. We did have a few questions about the issue in the YouTube comment sections and also in our preparations. I would rather try to switch the focus and pose this question: Is a relation between Japan and Russia genuinely will it genuinely improve without resolving the territorial dispute? And are there any prospects for cooperation before that, or is that an underlining term which first needs to be met and then we will move on to cooperation? Thank you.
Well, if I may start, what I can say is that, I'm not an expert on Japan-Russia relations to confess, but my hunch is if we can have a peace treaty, absolutely, definitely, it's going to facilitate and expedite the improvement in our relationship. That is absolutely clear.
Well, maybe I can pick up here. I'm not a specialist in these relations either, but I do agree with Professor Takahara that peace treaty, in fact, opens a lot of other possibilities, in terms of sort of like easing in visa procedures or going deeper with economic cooperation. So in that sense of like, that's a precondition for many other things that facilitate relations, facilitate contacts, and deepen the relations at the end of the day. But I also think that many issues can be explored in the meantime, in terms of sort of like second track diplomacy, in terms of like joint projects on energy transition, on climate change, in terms of education exchanges, so like those soft policy issues that can still be going on despite the fact that we don't have this treaty and that the solution is not in sight, at least from what I know.
Yeah, Gevorg, can I jump in with two maybe points? Of course, you know, there is a conditionality for peace treaty. So we, of course, to have a peace treaty would be a good idea. But if Japan would sign it just without any conditions, it would be ideal for Russia, right? So, but it cannot happen, and we understand why. So, and the key question for Russia is basically what goes first, security or economic prosperity, right? And security goes first, it's for sure. And I think that if both sides will find a formula which would take into account Russia's security considerations, there might be a solution. There might be a solution, but we know that there is yet another elephant in the room, United States, and agreements between US and Japan and the way how disputed territories can be used, right? So actually, I think that this is a very obvious and self-evident for grasping Russia's take on this issue. Security is #1 priority, even though there are many other issues, right, related to disputed territories. But this is very, very, you know, important issue, security, not economy. And the economy never was a top priority for Russian foreign policy, maybe except for early 90s, right? There was only one, maybe short period of time, a golden opportunity for countries to, you know, make deals with Russia, but not now. Though I'm optimistic that one day we'll come to a peace treaty. Thank you.
Can I say, you know, there are instances in the world, in the international relations and in the history, when there were peace treaties and diplomatic relations and development of economic affairs with still with a territorial dispute not resolved. And there is, so actually in East Asia, between, you know, all of these islands, you know, between China and Japan, Korea and Japan, there are several issues in the East Asia. There are, you know, Falkland, Malvine Islands in the South Atlantic, which is, you know, Argentina still claims it is their own, and, you know, it's controlled by United Kingdom. So in all of these cases, the issue of the territorial dispute was not laid as a precondition for the further development, because we all understand probably that domestically, not Russia, neither Japan will be, you know, it will be possible domestically to, you know, to abandon the claim, to give up the claim for South Kuril Islands or, you know, Northern territories. But well, if it's precluded, the cooperation precluded a lot of important, for each country, important economic and even political cooperation, it may be possibility to postpone it at least, or to single it out as a specific issue, but not link it to the peace treaty. Well, again, I'm also not a specialist in Russian-Japanese relations, but this is my thought. Thanks.
Brief comment. I don't know anything about, but even in the year of 1956, it was just after the US occupation, Japan, Soviet Union wanted to make the, you know, peace treaty, and they did. It actually couldn't break through, but anyway, so I think we, you know, have to be very, very pessimistic. And because of the COVID-19, everything, you know, all the crises in other ways. So let's be, you know, I mean, opportunistic and also creative and think about the vision. And probably it wouldn't be realized so soon, but I think with the, you know, creativity of the diplomacy and also interaction between the experts, etc., and with the change of the international system or situation, maybe it would be possible. So that's my hope. Yeah, thank you. Because Sankt-Peterburg was so beautiful and Russian people are so nice. And, I visited with Takahara-san, and it must be, we must be very friendly to each other. Yeah, that's my view. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Professor Takahara, you wanted to add something? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the presenters, my dear colleagues, Professors KURILLA, LOMAGIN, Romanova, Takenaka, and Takahara. I was supposed to give final remarks, but as you see, it's 12:13 even on my other watch, which is not running fast as compared to the other, as I realized. But still, 1 or 2 minutes before we finish this, I very much would like to end this seminar with on that positive or optimist note of cooperation, and maybe hope for a peace treaty between Japan and Russia, but also a general understanding, a realistic understanding that despite existing ongoing talks or issues, there is still a wide field and arena and motivation on both sides and on all sides to actually get involved more. I'd like to return to what Professor Takahara proposed as extending and promoting more exchange, and this is exactly what we're doing right now today. And this is also a great example because we as an educator or as an academic institution are cooperating with a diplomatic institution, right, with the Consulate General of Japan. So I very much am thankful to both to all the universities which have their representatives today here, but also to in a similar manner of seminars, perhaps including also more students, because I'm very much focused on student-oriented work mostly. So I would very much like to see them involved also in live discussions. I will not add anything on Russia's and Japan's foreign policy challenges in the new international circumstances, not only because I'm not an expert and specialist on it, but also because we had a great opportunity to listen to all of you about that in the past 2 hours. So thank you once again. Thanks to our viewers. Thank you for your questions. And we will hopefully release the video of this event as well at some point later. Let us keep in touch. You have a great day and a great evening for those in the Eastern Hemisphere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you.